committee's meetings today. I just thought we'd start a little bit early since everybody was here and ready to go. So I appreciate that you're here today. I would like to start our meeting today with a territorial acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land on which our school and district buildings are situated is the traditional, unceded, and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin people. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples on the land on which we gather here today. And I would also, before we move on to our first committee meeting, I would like to briefly do attendance, if I may, please. And obviously, I am here. Chair Humphreys, Vice Chair Boland.
Here.
Trustee Dobson.
Here.
Trustee Doherty sent her regrets today. Trustee Gannett.
Here.
Trustee Kaiser. I don't believe he's joined us as yet. Trustee Primo. Here. Trustee Rajamani is virtual today, I believe. Thank you, Carly. Trustee Reddy. Oh, she's not on right now. She's not on right now. Okay, she was on earlier, so hopefully she'll show up in a little bit. Student Trustee Ding, also virtual with us today. Grace, that's good. And Student Trustee Doherty was also unable to join us today. So with senior staff, we have Director Nemi here, Superintendent Barnes here, Superintendent Poirier here, Superintendent Smith here, Superintendent Cronwall here, and Superintendent Nicol
Here.
Excellent. Thank you very much. All right, we'll go back to our agenda. And I believe it's Program and Student Achievement Committee first, and I'll turn it over to Trustee Gannett.
Thank you, Chair Humphreys. Yes, the Program and Student Achievement Committee meeting of 2024. Are there any agenda amendments? None noted. I move to approve the agenda, and I just require a seconder. Okay, seconded. All in favor? Thank you. Are there any conflicts of interest? Again, none noted. We have one item on the agenda today, and it's the secondary technological studies classroom update. I'd like to turn it over to Superintendent Scott Nicol to proceed. Thank you, Scott. Thank you. So you have the report here already, and as mentioned, it's about the fiscal responsibility, which is obviously a priority for us. And in order to have fiscal responsibility, in order for the tech equipment, it requires sustainability, and sustainability means the use of cyclical repair and replacement. We know that the equipment usage for our technological classes is essential to provide pathways for the students. We know that it's a key component of our student success. We know that ineffective uses are ineffective. For the equipment to be ineffective would be a barrier for our students, and we need obviously a proactive strategic approach for that. We know that historically as well, with any repair that were to occur to any of the technological equipment, there would either be a local teacher or a local business that would be able to help out. But what we've recognized over time, especially in the most recent years, is that with increase in insurance and demands upon some of our local small businesses, it's resulted in the inability of some local businesses to be available to us. In addition to that, the businesses that are available or that we've been able to get some work from, and I give an example of that in the report, we recognize that the consumable or the part that needed to be replaced was no more than 5% of the actual cost. And the cost being in the thousands of dollars for that. We also recognize too that the labor and the transportation being the biggest part. So in October, an inventory was done for all secondary schools to give a couple of examples, and just in terms of taking stock of what equipment we did have, as well as its state of functionality. At ADHS, as an example, there were 140 pieces approximately counted, over 200 pieces counted at fellows. And in fact, once you summed all of them up over the 7 secondary sites, there's over 1,000 pieces of inventory. And we're talking things from welders, welding equipment, equipment within transportation, to routers, to sewing machines, dryers, ovens. So it's a wide variety. on August 21st, just this year, we met, a small group of us met, in fact, with the director of the Outreach and Strategic Initiative for the Millwright Regional Council, which is quite the title. But anyways, she was able to walk us through a number of the rooms within Fellows, just so that she had an idea of the scope and the demands that were required. And knowing that, she was able to connect us to another person for a future meeting. His name was Scott Thompson, and his title was Business Representative for the Millwright Regional Council. From there, he provided 8 names that he thought would be suited for that. And from there, we put out a request for a quote, and we were able to get 4 of the 8 people to respond back to that. In addition to that, we've also, we're posting, as mentioned in the report here too, for a millwright position, because we're looking at it from 2 different perspectives. The one being, are we able to get an outside agency to come in, or an outside business, or is it better to have someone local as well? So being able to see what is available in terms of a local position, but also what's available as an exterior company, and being able to make an informed decision for that too. So we've done that as well, and the posting will close shortly. In addition, we reached out to a number of school boards. We received information from 2 school boards. One of them was a little bit more viable in terms of the information, but in terms of companies that they use, this was in Ottawa, that they use to help with their processes, and neither of those companies were interested in us, but at least we at least looked at the information for that. So we also recognize too that in fact, during my preparation for this report, knowing that in March, I believe, of last school year, that there was $300,000 put forward as a one-time, and I asked in terms of finances if any of that has been spent, and it has not been spent yet. But in terms of the next steps forward here, so we have posted for the temporary millwright position. We're doing a review request for quotations, and we're going to continue to communicate with the other school boards about their practices. So just to give you an update in terms of the status of where we're at this point in time. And the closing date, I don't actually have the closing date for that millwright posting.
Because we don't have one yet.
Okay. I know it's in the process. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So-
once that closes, then we can take a look at the applicants and compare it to the 4 providers that are, or the 4 providers that showed interest.
I add, Chair.
Sure.
So just to clarify, the request for quotation that went out through the procurement process is for there's a 2-phased approach if we outsource this work. And the first part is to complete a thorough assessment of all of the equipment on what needs to be done with the pieces of equipment. So it's not at this point, we're not procuring like the millwright to do the work. We're procuring potentially a millwright to do the assessment of all the equipment. And then from there, they would write a plan about what needs to be done with all of the equipment. And so that's what we put out through the procurement process. We're sort of taking a 2-phased approach. And so do we have confirmation that we have 4?
Correct.
That have submitted?
Correct.
Okay, that's good news. So, and then we're doing a posting, and then we're going, because there are strengths and drawbacks to both models. And that's why we're sort of we're doing both, like we're putting both out to see what we get back. And then we can decide on which approach is best.
The posting, if I can add, there is some aspects of doing a post that in this case involves conversations with QP 1247, but we do have intentions and hope that we are able to put it out on Wednesday.
It would be
We would do it for a bit of,
temporary position, because
Yeah.
we don't know
that's right.
once we get ourselves up to a certain standard and we deal with the backlog, whether or not we need a full-time position to lead the repair and preventative maintenance of our shop equipment. That'll be determined through this process. So we would be posting for a temp position at this point.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments? Yes,
Just a quick question. Thanks for that update. And it sounds like you're making really good progress on moving forward. Can I ask how the classes are managing currently? Because I know we have a lot of equipment that's actually not able to be used. So I'm wondering how are the staff and students managing during the transition piece?
So I'll certainly offer Superintendent Smith and Superintendent Cromwell to weigh in terms of their family schools.
Sure.
From our most recent meeting at the CAS and ACES, where for myself, I sat in with the secondary. The only concern that when I asked that question was actually about sawdust.
Okay.
So that was actually the concern that was brought forward from the secondary administrators at that point in time, which we've been able to rectify through health and safety. Yeah. But that was their concern at that point in time. Recognizing as well in speaking with members of our student success team that yes, there are some equipment that still is not being able to be used, but they're still able to do programming.
Okay.
But
That would be what I would add as well. I mean, I think that these are not new concerns, so they have adjusted programming and they have developed plans to be able to make sure that they're meeting their curriculum requirements with pieces that are working and functioning. And I think it differs from place to place and shop to shop in terms of what is accessible and what's accessible right now. So the impact may be greater in certain places, but I have not heard anything new coming forth from my schools this year in terms of additional concerns on top of what we had already identified, and that they've already developed plans just to support to the best of their ability.
Thanks for that. I'm glad to hear that. I know that it's probably not new. We've been struggling with this for a couple of years, to be honest. So I know that staff have adapted as best they can. So I appreciate that. Good. Thank you.
Yes.
I'll just add a few more points of clarification. So we have a working group made up of a few people off of exec. Superintendent Barnes, Superintendent Poirier, Superintendent Nickel and myself, plus Senior Manager of Facilities, our Assistant Manager for Health and Safety, and then our program staff that support skilled trades. So we have formed a kind of a little subcommittee that is working on, and representatives from procurement as well. So we're meeting almost on a monthly basis to keep this moving forward. And providing each other with updates, because different people have different roles and responsibilities with this plan. So we're meeting monthly to work through it together. And so our next meeting is actually tomorrow. And
10 a.m.
yeah, where people will be giving updates, and in particular, we'll be interested in looking at the procurement process, to see what came forward in terms of expressions of interest or whatever for doing that phase one, that analysis, that assessment of all of our equipment. Essentially taking the inventory that was already completed and going around with that inventory and then looking at each piece of equipment and saying, okay, does it need to be removed, repaired, or, that's what, so it's just to essentially, and then to develop a plan once all that information is current. Priorities, probably. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Being the chair, I'll go last.
Mhm.
I like the example that was given about ADHS. It's scary to me to see the amount of money that goes into labor. And as people that know me, I'm very passionate about this particular file. I'm glad that it's moving along because I know that we've had a very unique, challenging start to the school year. So thanks to everyone who's kept it on the radar. I appreciate it. We do have significant money set aside that, as Scott said, hasn't been spent yet. My concern would be that if for some reason we aren't able to hire someone as a millwright, temporary, if we do outsource this work, I think that we will struggle to get a lot done for the amount of money charged. That's really my main bone of contention. I'm not saying there's any easy answers, but this concrete example is a very, very good one.
Yeah.
People are in the business to make money, and these particular businesses know that they're highly, highly sought after. I've done a bit of research, and I really hope that there is some taker. In a perfect world, it would be great if it was somebody local. However, when the posting comes out, let's see who bites or who applies. I know that the team has done some sort of research on probably many aspects of what they need, which is probably in the job description, but This unique individual would have a very, very specific skill set that may require to entice this person to come and work for the school board may require more money than the public might see as typical. I think they're going to be very hard to find, but I haven't done the nitty gritty research. So I guess the best case scenario is I'm cautiously optimistic. Thanks for keeping it on the radar, but I just can't stress enough that I think that the monies that are set aside, the person hours that go in to fixing things, if it's done from outside, we'll be lucky to get a fair amount of work done. And it's not just that, it's also for future, for maintenance. I mean, we do have a big task ahead of us, but it's the long run we're looking at. I wish you well. I hope that I know that there's one or two people in the area that I've spoken to that might express some interest. Again, I'm not an expert on millwrights, but I know enough about the trades, and I mean, our future for our children, particularly people that aren't interested in necessarily college universities, are the trades. They're crying for them. So I really hope that if we can get this equipment up to snuff, and you know, it's in need of, as I've said to people in our board, our shops are diamonds in the rough. I think that there's so much potential. They're large shops, they're potentially well equipped, but they're tired and really need some TLC. So that's really all that I have to say. I just wanted to save my comments till the end. I'd like to thank Scott for giving us this overview. Lastly, is there any new business that arises for this particular committee? None noted. I'd like to make a motion for adjournment. My fellow trustee here and my other fellow trustee. I just think that this is a really, really challenging thing to do. And I'm just hoping that it gets done. And all in favor? Okay, this meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Trustee Gannett. Our next committee item, or our next committee is equity and inclusion. I'm not sure about Kaiser. Oh, sorry. No, I don't think Trustee Kaiser has joined us. I did send him a quick message, but he may still be, you know, being children. Oh,
Ellen?
oh, are you filling in? I apologize.
Me?
Oh,
It says according to
yeah,
Oh, well, I never,
he didn't ask you, right? Okay,
no,
all
I
right.
did. I just,
Well, I will just carry on. I think that was
Thanks.
just a leftover
Yeah,
from another,
and yes,
from another one.
much appreciated.
possible.
surprise.
Way down there.
So I'm assuming
I'm
that
sorry.
Trustee Kaiser is not able to join us this afternoon, so I will just carry on with the Equity and Inclusion Committee. There's only one item on the agenda, and I'm happy to bring that forward. I believe that we're looking at a review of the Student Support Fund, and I'm assuming that Jessica's bringing it forward on your behalf, or on behalf of the team, mind you. Right. Okay.
I'll just give.
Okay, can we give it a try?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So we believe it's important that every September we bring a summary of what took place during the previous year with the Student Support Fund. And so that's what we're doing today. I will share that the Student Support Fund now falls under Human Rights, Equity, and Anti-Oppression, because it is an equity initiative in the RCDSB. And so that's why Jessica is here, because she is leading this work in partnership with me, our office, the director's office, and also in partnership with corporate services. So over to you, Jess.
All right, so you have the report, so I won't share all of the details with you, but I want to highlight a few things, which is that the Student Support Fund was established to support students and ensure that they are able to access things at school that they might not otherwise be able to participate fully in. And it consists of grants that are $250 per student or $500 per family if there are multiple students. We have in the current status, we have two fundraising initiatives that are ongoing. One is the payroll opportunity that any staff have to make contributions, starting with $5 monthly contribution up to, I suppose, however high they wish to go. And the other is we do have one-time donations that are possible through our website, through the Student Support Fund. And what happens when, or just to back up a little bit, when a student is in need, a staff member will complete a Student Support Fund application and send that in for review. They are never identified by name, the students, because we are protecting their privacy. So to go back to the current status, we average about $10,000 a year through payroll contributions, which is obviously very well appreciated. And I can't tell you how much is contributed on a one-time donation. I don't have that information for you, but I do have kind of the trajectory that I think is really important for everybody to know is in the beginning of the Student Support Fund, in the first year, there were 69 applications that were approved and about just over $10,000, almost $11,000 was spent in that year. Since that time, we've had triple the amount of approved applications, but 6 times the amount of costs associated. So the needs for students are increasing, but the costs are increasing exponentially. And just to note as well, there have been different initiatives that have happened based on needs of our community, such as during COVID, there were packages that were delivered during those COVID years. And that amount is there, that it was $13,523. Over time, we have spent over $170,000 on meeting the basic needs of students. So obviously it is a need that is ongoing and increasing. And we just have included the revenues and expenses over the last 2 years. And you can see in 2022, 2023, our revenues were exceeded by expenses by $20,000. Whereas last year, our revenues were $76,000 and expenses were almost $63,000. So there was more revenue brought in than money going out, which obviously is what we need to be able to support the Student Support Fund. I think what is really important for everyone to know is that the needs are increasing. The calls for support are increasing, and we are continuing to find ways, in addition to payroll and donations, to support the ongoing fundraising for the Student Support Fund, including lots of important partnerships with community members as well. The only thing that isn't in here is we will be starting up our merchandise funds. Proceeds from merchandise also support the Student Support Fund, and that is going to be starting again next week.
Okay, any questions for Jess?
Just I have more of a comment. I followed this fund and there's such a need and it's growing and growing and growing. So, I mean, the staff of the schools, they know the kids, they're front line, and kudos to them if they see someone in need. Some kids just probably quietly suffer, not be willing to come forward. So I'm sure that there are some staff that have a relationship with Johnny or Janie that take them aside and say, hey, you know, there's a way we might be able to help you. So I really appreciate that, as well as the fact that it's continuing in these difficult times, because we all get phone calls every week, donate here, donate there. So there's a very homegrown donation that's really clear and dear to my heart. It directly involves our kids in our schools. So thank you.
Uncle Nick?
A couple of questions. So it's nice to see, you know, like Mike had said, you know, we spent 171,000 on 900 students. That's like roughly 10% of our student population. You know, so that's, when you look at it that way, that's you know, a fair chunk of of students that we're helping, which is, awesome. So just, I guess a minor question is just, so for 2023, 22 to 23, we had a $20,000 deficit. Where did we get the other 20,000 from?
I'm sorry, did you ask where did we?
Yes, right. So we're in a deficit. So
So on the upside, there have been more years where we have raised more revenue than there are years that we have spent more than we've raised. So it's not sustainable to continue to do that over time, of course, but we did have the funds in reserve to be able to support that.
So we've had carryovers from one year to the next that helped that, like that year where we had a $20,000 deficit. We had, there were funds from previous years that were able to we were able to use that to offset it. But if we look at the expenses from last year, we were very, very fortunate to get some large, as you know, some very large donations last year. If those types of donations, these large donations do not come in and we still have that high level of expenses, our reserves in the SSF are going to dwindle. So we have, some strategies in place to try to increase our revenues or maintain the level that we had last year, but it's going to be challenging.
Actually, I just have one.
Go ahead, Mike.
People that donate, whether it be from the board or wherever, from an accounting tax point of view, is there any way that can be looked at favorably or not?
It depends on how the money is provided, in order to meet the needs, the criteria that CRA set, but we do have a donation module on school cash, which does provide a donation receipt that you could be used for CRA purposes, but that means the donation has to be made through that method.
What about payroll deductions?
I don't think so.
It's
That's a
it's on the
total?
T4.
Is it on the T4?
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
sorry.
it is.
The reason I asked the question was I think it's just more recently been put on the T4. I don't know if it was in years gone by, but I know last year I believe it was. That's why I asked the question. I think that's been a change. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Joey.
I have two things. One is something I'd like to address my fellow trustees with. And that's that when I look at the total funds from 2016 to today's date, I suppose, 171, 615, 31, and 900 applications. If we were to say on average per student, it's $190.68. And I feel like someone who's continually beating the gavel, I suppose, on this, but I'd like to contrast that $190.68 of needed funds against the cost of going on these international trips that are $7,000. So I think we really need to keep in mind, the next time that these applications for the international trips come on, that there are some students who are making applications for essentially $190. And we have other students in the exact same schools who are going on trips that cost $7,000 just to participate. I think that this really highlights the difference in the financial circumstances of our students. And I think we really need to pay attention to that. And while it might mean a missed opportunity for someone who can afford a $7,000 trip, I think those funds, if we're able to raise more, need to go to the students who need it more, who are making applications for under $200. So that's just a note on that. I do have something that I raised before, and my concern is the deduction from their employment package for the teachers and the new hires. While I think it is exceptionally generous of them to offer to do that from their own pay, I also recognize that most teachers pay a lot of money already just to fund their own classroom. So if we're taking $10,000 from teachers, and I understand it's been asked of them and they say yes, and I know when I go to the LCBO, they ask me, do I want to donate to CHEO? And I say like, okay, yes, for sure. I feel a bit uncomfortable taking $10,000 from the teachers, even though it's voluntary. I feel like it's not a really fair ask when we already asked teachers to fund so much of their classroom. So I suppose not two questions, but two things to think about on inequity as well as on the employer-employee relations. That's all I have to say.
Thank you for those comments. Anybody else have any questions or comments? I just wondered, Jess, I know we did have some big donations last year. I'm just wondering sort of what the thinking is on new partnerships or how we're approaching, getting some more dollars into those coffers.
Right. So I am, as I'm sure you know, very new in my role. So Kristen and I have been engaging in conversations about what that might look like. And I'm not sure, Kristen, if you want to share anything.
Yeah. I can share a couple things. So we did have a preliminary meeting with Kaylee from Smitty's Home Hardware because they were a huge donor last year. And they are interested in continuing to support the SSF. They're definitely planning a pretty large fundraiser for, I think it's February or April. April. And so we're already in the planning stages for that. I think they're also looking at one maybe in the summertime. That's not confirmed yet. So they still want to continue to partner with us, and we're really grateful for that. We've also talked about just sort of like reviewing our website with fresh eyes to look at how easy is it for people to be aware of the SSF and to make a donation, whether you're an employee, a member of the public, one-time donation, ongoing donations. Like, let's look at our website and make use of that tool to just to make it easier. So that's another piece. We have been talking about other types of partnerships. So I did walk over to I go to Tim Hortons here a lot, right over there.
Have a conversation.
And I did have a conversation with someone there just about their Smile Cookie Days and whether or not we could be a partner for that. And they're interested. So lots of little, we're starting to work on some different possibilities.
Good.
Yeah.
That's great. Any other questions or comments? Yes, certainly recognize the need is very great, and hopefully we can find other sources of those donations over the next year, including obviously Smitty's Hardware that's been so kind to us over the last year or two, I guess now. But always looking for new ideas. So I guess if anybody around the table has a thought too about somewhere else that some organization that you're tied into. I know last year I'm involved with a thrift shop in Renfrew, and they did donate their quarterly 10%. So there may be other groups that you're involved with, and if you are, maybe let Jessica know so that we can follow up on that as well. That's good. Thank you for the report on that. I appreciate that. You've done really good work and really great support for our students. That's for sure. Lots of work done there. Okay, any other items? I didn't actually ask for an agenda approval. I apologize. Thing that we should have also added onto the agenda. Okay, if not, I will look to someone to adjourn this particular meeting. Thank you, Mike. Seconded by Jody. Thank you very much. All in favor of adjourning the Equity and Inclusion Committee? Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay.
Where did you see?
Now we're on to Finance and Resources. And I believe, Leo, you're in charge of this one. So we'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. So I now call the October 8th, 2024 Finance and Resources Committee meeting to order. Everyone has received the agenda. Are there any amendments? Only once, twice, sorry, all gone. So I just need a mover and a seconder to approve the so-called agenda that we have. Thanks, Mike. Seconder. Oh, Carthy, thank you.
Yeah.
Saw a couple of hands go up. All in favor? Thank you, that's passed. And the first thing that we have on is transportation. I hope we're anticipating.
Imagine that.
I'll hand it over to Chris.
Thank you, Chair. The actual report is very brief. What we decided to do, so Superintendent Barnes and I decided that we would write a very brief report and simply link in the messages from last week. So the RCJTC provided an update on October 2nd, and then we, through the Director's Office, provided an update to families on Friday, October 4th. So we linked in those updates so that there was complete alignment between what you were receiving in this open session and what was communicated last week. Since then, because you received the package on Friday, we had a subsequent day of bus contract negotiations yesterday with, so the consortium was represented there. The two directors are at the table for the fourth day. And there were representatives from the, representing the 7 bus companies that we've been trying to negotiate with. So yesterday we did reach a tentative agreement. So an agreement in principle, where the articles that are being changed from the old contract to the new contract were agreed upon and signed off on by both the consortium and the representatives from the bus companies. So you saw the joint statement that was sent out to all members of the educational community. So that was sent out to by the RCJTC. They emailed it to families that receive transportation services, the MP and MPP. And then we followed up with trustees, staff, Ministry of Education staff, and all of our families as an FYI, because we know that many people have been impacted by this issue. So a couple of highlights that I would like to give at this time. Because there were no bus contracts in place, we had to close, not we, that the consortium had to close the system to those bus companies because we didn't have any signed contracts or an agreement that we were going to extend a contract. So we had to close that system. They were not able to access their route information. Which means now it's been open because we have an agreement in principle. It's been reopened to them. They are in the process of figuring out their routes. They have to do dry runs. They have to, kind of regroup with all of the drivers and assign drivers to routes. So that is going to take a little bit of time. They told us that by this Friday, they will give us a tentative start date for buses and then confirm that start date on Tuesday. They made a very valid point yesterday that we simply cannot just have like 5 buses start and then 10 buses go. And then because they are very concerned about one bus trying to get onto school property with hundreds of cars and children and adults. And so they have serious safety concerns about not all starting around the same time. Because if they can have a common start date, it alleviates all the traffic at the schools. And that was a very logical argument that they made. So we did agree with them on that. That being said, we do recognize that even if we have a common start date, if that's what they communicate to us this Friday and then Tuesday, that there will be a common start date potentially, but then there may not be all of the buses that have drivers initially, and then you will have to do subsequent work to fill routes that do not have drivers. So we do anticipate that. So on a related note, we have the family payment plan that was communicated to families last Friday in more detail. It's a graduated scale model that another school board in Ontario uses when routes do not have a driver for X number of days in a consecutive way, which we were doing something, we had a model in place last year, the 2 school boards. We are paying families back to the first day of school. We will use the sum of the savings from not running buses to fund that. So we will be paying families back retroactive to the first day of school. It is going to be application based. So families that would like the subsidy will be able to apply for it. And we are hiring the consortium is hiring a third-party firm to administer that subsidy program because it's going to be done through, I believe, electronic transfers.
No checks.
Oh, checks. Okay. And those 2 school boards it's not wise for us to collect all that financial information because there are records retention rules and all of that. Plus, our 2 small school boards do not have the human resources to be able to manage all of that. So we are hiring a third party to take care of paying subsidies to families. So that's one piece. A couple of other things that I'd like to highlight as a result of yesterday's tentative agreement. We've been very open in the last week about the impacts on school board budgets. And so as you know, we received 12%. Well, I'll back up. For 23-24, we received 2% from the ministry. The consortium offered 4% for the 23-24 school year. That had been agreed upon. So they received a 4% increase for for the 23-24 school year as a contract extension. There was a lot of advocacy that happened with the Ministry of Education around the transportation funding formula. As a result, there were aspects of it that had been reviewed and revised. We were one of the boards and consortiums that sort of benefited from that revision to the transportation formula, and we received a 12% increase from 23-24 to 24-25. That 12% increase had been offered to the owners of the bus companies, and as you know, had not been accepted. The reality is we need buses on the road. Our students need transportation. There are many, I shouldn't say many, there are other school boards and consortia, even within the Eastern region, who are having to take funds out of another envelope to pay for transportation. And so there's one board that we know of that is 50% larger than RCDSB that's paying an average of 1.8 million out of other envelopes to pay for transportation. So if we looked at that from a proportional perspective, that would mean 1.2 million for us if we had the same circumstance. Okay, that would be really hard. We also know that there's $51 million right now in what's called transition funding across the province that is supporting a variety of different school boards with additional funding above the transportation funding formula to help with the transportation costs, because some school boards have arbitrated arbitrated settlements that are costing school boards quite a bit in comparison to their funding, their base funding. That transition funding, our understanding is that it's going to be removed at the end of the 25-26 school year. So in 2 years. When that $51 million gets pulled out across all of the 34 consortia across the province, many school boards are going to be in a very similar situation, and even worse from a financial perspective if the transportation funding formula is not reviewed. So we are very hopeful that in the next 2 years that the Ministry of Education is going to do a further review of the funding so that school boards are not having to use funding from other envelopes to pay for transportation. So I'm going to give you some specific data for us. Just going to pull it up.
So just for clarification, so for that 51 million
Mhm.
that expires in a year and a half, we don't get any of that. So it's not going to affect us
No.
in that aspect. right?
Exactly.
So we just wanted to make sure that
Yes.
people understood that we don't get any of that thing.
Yeah.
So in a year and a half, it's not going to affect us negatively.
Yeah, the way it will other boards.
Yes.
I highlighted that because it's making us hopeful that there will be something that happens at a provincial level to support all school boards with the transportation costs, because 51 million across all the boards is a lot of money. And if that gets removed with nothing else put into place, many school boards have communicated that they're going to be very, very challenging.
And it's hoped that they just don't replace that 51 million, right? Because then we will not be affected either in that
Exactly.
aspect, right?
Yeah,
Right? So it's like, yeah, like,
they need to.
hopefully, to all the school boards.
So just to give you a preliminary sense, so I gave the example of one school board in Eastern Ontario with an arbitrated settlement that is pulling 1.8 million out of other envelopes to pay for transportation. Proportionately, that would, if we had that exact same context for us, it would be 1.2 million. With the contract that we have in principle, what we're looking at is an average of between $500,000 and $560,000 per year that we are going to have to pull from envelopes outside of transportation. So it's less than half proportionately compared to one of our neighboring boards in the Eastern region. What I would also say is that this is public knowledge. I always look at Jen to remember what's public and not. Is that there was a request for proposal that went out in the Peterborough area consortium to secure transportation. So that's the long process that we didn't have that time on our side to do that. But if we were to go to an RFP, we could maybe look at what just happened in Peterborough. So in Peterborough, what happened is the contract that they ended up with is actually very, very similar to the contract that we have in principle right now. So if we had gone through the full RFP process, we probably would have landed pretty much where we did land yesterday, or maybe even a little higher, if we were to compare to some other arbitrated settlements that are in the eastern region. So I guess what we're trying to say is we're among other boards that are facing similar challenges. They're all unique. All the contracts are very different. Some are arbitrated. Some have been established through a full RFP program or process, and then we accomplish this through contract negotiations. But we're all similar in the sense that there are some challenges. And it seems like, although we don't get to see the bottom line for the for-profit bus companies, you know, what they are communicated, and this is logical, their costs have really gone up too. And it's possible that the transportation formula, the funding formula is not keeping up with those increased costs. So I'll just repeat. On average, we're looking at 500,000 to 560,000 coming out of an envelope outside of transportation. What I will share is that we're going to be okay for this year because the Ministry of Education has been reviewing, as they always do, they're always sort of keeping an eye on school board budgets. They're looking at, did they provide, you know, in April, did they provide enough money for X or Y? We at revised estimates in November/December, we will be receiving a little bit more flexibility in some other budgets, some increased revenues that we're going to be able to help offset for this year. So we're confident about the 24-25 school year. But when we go into the budget process in the spring to bring you a recommendation for the 25-26 budget, that's where we will have to think about how are we going, and right now it's projected to be 546,000 extra in funds that are needed to pay for transportation. So how are we going to pay for that? And so there are two main ways, you know, and we'll work through this process and bring you our best thinking. But there are two main ways that we would need to figure that out. One is through reductions that would be sustainable over a period of time. So that would help with years 3, 4, and 5 of the contract as well. And or that potentially with a combination of a strategic drawdown of some of our reserves. And I say that because remember that I was saying that when that $51 million gets removed, we're very hopeful that the funding formula might get changed. So we may not want to make $500,000 of reductions and then the funding increases the next year because the formula got fixed. So we might think about doing some reductions plus drawdown from reserves a little bit and see what happens when that transition funding gets pulled. Because if the funding formula gets revised and we get a nice increase, then it wouldn't require us to make as many reductions to be able to balance. I've given a lot of information and a lot of it's verbal because this report was written prior to us getting the agreement in principle yesterday.
And
Good.
if I could just add
Yes.
one thing from a risk perspective, because you might be wondering, how can we avoid being in this position in the future? Previous to this period, we negotiated rates annually. So we had a contract that was extended. Operators agreed to run while we negotiated rates. As you know, that practice changed in June of this year. But in the contract, we've actually already agreed upon increased rates for the next 5 years. So there's the elimination of that annual negotiation is gone. And so I just wanted to provide that reassurance that we wouldn't feel that we would be in this place again.
The stability of a 5-year contract with the possibility of an extension of 2 more years, and those rates are also agreed upon if both sides agree to the contract extension.
Check one, and probably Jen Burns can answer this. I believe reading is correct. Probably about a third of the districts and boards don't have reserves.
Well, as Kristen mentioned, the ministry's done a review and done a non-salary benchmark increases. So that data might actually change because they've gone back a couple of years and restated everything. So if they didn't have reserves, then they would still not have reserves. I don't know the answer to that question specifically.
in my reading, I was saying that like those numbers are supposedly increasing of boards or districts without reserves. And it was 30-something% that I read, which I found was high. But, so I mean, the blended situation that you described is an interesting one about taking some out of reserves and
Mhm.
being creative in other ways.
And it's really to also, it's to see what happens with the transportation funding, to give us that window. And to perhaps not have to implement all the reductions in 1 year. So there's sort of two reasons why we would think about doing that. So again, executive council went through a very detailed review of many budgets for 24-25 and made, in consultation with a variety of different members of the educational community, made many decisions that we brought to you for the 24-25 budget. So we'll be going through that process again and doing another, review of all the, programs and services and positions that we have, and really evaluating every single, we need to really be thinking about value for dollar and every, where we're putting our money and what's the impact.
Any other questions? Oh, yes, Karthi.
Just a comment. Job well done, long-term contract that takes away stress from you all. Very well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have a question. And Mike, just kind of following up on your question about reserves, I'm wondering if it was the information on the number of boards who had deficit budgets, because that has been just that not too long ago. So it might have been that one. That was quite,
Like a high.
it was high. So I think maybe that's what it was, as opposed to not having reserves, but have a deficit budget. I think that's
You're
probably.
probably correct.
The other piece I wondered about, you may recall that at our last board meeting, we did have a motion in place where the chair of the Catholic board and myself were going to put together a letter to Minister Dunlop requesting some assistance in resolving this issue. That no longer is really necessary. However, I'm wondering whether we should still do something like that, but then really advocate for a longer term resolution for our transportation issues. So I just want to, we'll have to change that motion, I guess amend that motion if you're agreeable to that, so that we can go forward with that. We did develop a letter and it hadn't gone yet, but
I'm going to change the wording.
we can change the wording. So if you're agreeable to amending the motion so that it's really advocating for longer term transportation support, that would be helpful.
I support Susan.
You'll support that? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so are you comfortable with, I'll work on some amendment wording. Is that okay? And then I'm assuming you're probably all in support of that. Karthi is seconding it. Is everybody,
Right.
is everybody in agreement that we would change that letter to advocate as opposed to resolve this issue? All in favor of that? Okay, that's great. Thank you for that. Appreciate that. I just wanted to get that noted. Thank you, Mr.
Right.
Chair.
Anything else? I just want to reiterate what Karthi said, and we had talked about earlier, just about, I'm sure tonight you'll have like a nice sleep, right? And yeah, so like hats off to everybody that had their little tentacles involved in this, right? Yeah, it's a long process, right? We were hoping that it wouldn't be this long to go to October 8th, and they're still not, don't have buses on the road just yet, so maybe another week or so. But still, it's yeah. At least we have a deal and job well done. And the only thing I have to say is that, I agree that we do have to show like a deficit, for the bus transportation envelope. Just for the simple reason, like if we were to make a balanced budget, then the ministry, I don't know what your hoop hauling is all about. You have a balanced budget, right? So we need to show to them that, this is affecting us. And, at least we do have some reserves that we can draw from. which is, good. You want to say something, then I'll come back to you, Susan. Okay, I'll come back.
I just wanted to say that we do feel very relieved. The main reason is that some of our families were really being negatively impacted. We were receiving emails, and all of us collectively were receiving emails and phone calls on a daily basis from families that were really struggling due to this issue. Everything from loss of work time and income as a result, to the point where people were trying to figure out whether to drive their children to school or pay rent, to people being laid off because they missed so much work, children who just were not able to get to school at all and the impact on their learning, just really awful and heart-wrenching stories. And that is why we had to make a decision to go beyond the transportation envelope, knowing that there will be some negative impacts, in terms of other services, but we really did need to get buses back on the road. And the other thing that I would like to say is just that I want to recognize Superintendent Barnes and her colleague, Mary Lynn from our CCDSB, the amount of work that they've been doing behind the scenes to support negotiations has been incredible. No one knows the amount of hours that they have put in. I don't even know the hours. It's been incredible. So, and they have been, it's been a long process, and they have been very, very dedicated to this. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just lastly, as I'm sure my fellow trustees would agree, we really appreciated our director keeping us in the loop.
Mhm.
It was really nice to be able to not read the circumstances, but do some reading.
Mhm.
And just lastly, the comments that I had and the discussions I had with local parents and guardians and grandparents were, what really impressed me is I really had nobody stop me on the street or the grocery store, just tear a strip off me. It was all civil conversation. And, I appreciated that. So those two comments, I just want to finish off with. So thank you.
Thank you. Consent. Thanks. On to the next item, staffing and enrollment update for 2024-25 report. Jacqueline.
Thanks, Leo. As you all do have the report, I'll just point out a few highlights. Every year we bring a summary to you with updated information about our enrollment and the staffing that is associated with that, and that we meet at the start of the school year and over the first few weeks to kind of compare where our staffing is in relation to the actual enrollment. So you know that in the spring, we make projections on what we believe we will have as enrollment, and then we staff based on those projections. And then in the fall, we do our best to kind of self-correct as necessary. This year, I would say, has been the least amount of self-correcting that I have experienced, other than secondary. But for elementary, certainly has been. So I might go out of order, but on the report, but the elementary enrollment, even though we did see an increase in our actual enrollment, we still were at a space in place where the classes were already staffed in a way that was able to accept those students. And other than an addition of one teacher and one ECE, that was the only adjustment we had to make this fall in terms of that initial in response to enrollment and where students landed, because we never know if they're all dispersed across the whole district or if a big chunk of people land in one place. That will have some differing impacts. So you can see there when you read it, the different things that meant to us. Also in terms of the EA staffing, we were in a position where we did not add any more supports until just recently, when we were responding to a couple of needs that have come up, and there might be some more that come forward. but we have been working with everybody to try to respond to those too. And we also have some continued hiring and response to funding through organizations such as Jordan's Principal that supports some of our First Nations students, but we also receive funding sometimes for supports for Métis and Inuit students as well. So just that's of note as well. Under the school support counseling staffing, although we had a little decrease, then we had a little increase because we hired back some itinerant SSCs. And then finally, in response to some needs at one of our locations, we have increased by an additional 0.5. So really in total, we're up to a total of 27 in the SSC piece. For secondary, we had a small increase in the number of students versus projections. But again, based on where students landed, we saw quite an increase at Armpire District High School, and therefore needed to support them with some additional sections as well as Valor K-12. And I would say some of that is also how we approached this year in terms of trying to support the schools that are smaller in being able to offer robust programming for their schools as well. So this is where we're at. All of this has taken place, meeting both contractual obligations and also ministry reporting obligations for class size compliance. And we're all set and moving forward in a positive way. So.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, Jody.
Thank you. I had a question regarding the closing of our intensive program for students that had physical and intellectual challenges. I think we broke up that program, or it was the school, correct?
You do Horizons?
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay.
Yes, thank you. Not quite the criteria that you said there in terms of the students who may have been participating, but yes, we are on pause for this current school year.
Thank you. Thank you. So with the pause on the New Horizons program, what impact has that had on the requirements for EAs and well, I suppose also ECs potentially? Did that impact our allocation?
So in terms of New Horizons, we service as our board the older students, older being the older age of elementary. Okay, so it wouldn't impact ECEs. We also have when we have staffed it, the Phoenix Center staff some staff, but we also staff. So we have EAs and teachers that were also assigned to New Horizons. And then Phoenix Center has their therapist workers. So really, essentially, you can think about like we were already putting some staff. Now, does that mean it equals exactly the same back out? Not necessarily, right? You might have a group of students together. And again, depending on distribution of students and needs across the district. But I guess what I would say is the special education department, and Jenny, of course, can jump in. They do an assessment looking at the needs of all students at all schools, and then based on that, make an allocation for EAs. So knowing that New Horizons was not going to be there, and knowing that certain students would be in their home school, they would have accounted for that.
I have two more questions. The second one was, we talked about specifically with classes with 16 or more kindergarten students that ECs are required. What is the average class size for kindergarten right now?
I do not have that information in front of me. Sorry, but
Yeah, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. It's
But we can give the cap.
oh yeah, we
So
can
the
get the cap.
actual-
Sorry, I thought you wanted. Go ahead.
I have the average.
Okay,
sorry,
that's the
yes,
average,
yes,
but the
yes.
actual class size cap is 29.
Okay.
And then 10% of our kindergarten classes can be at 30, 31, and 32. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
So if there's 32, are there two ECs in there?
No.
Okay, there's one. It's I went to my daughter's kindergarten class a couple weeks ago, And myself and all the parents were just floored at how tiny the classroom was. And that there was like 30 kids plus a teacher plus an EA. So I was wondering, like, what's the impact on these like large classrooms, the additional EAs, the teachers? Like, is there in this formula, is there any indication of, or is there any consideration given to actual space requirements and how we staff? Or does that not come into it when we're staffing?
Well, most schools have certain classrooms that are designated for kindergarten use, right? And will be furnished or sometimes some rentals and things done purpose built or purpose renovated for kindergarten needs, and then also access to like equipment and materials that they would need for kinder. And depending on the school, we have seen in some cases, I don't know what Mackenzie's would be, but I know when I had family schools, some schools, we might have had 3 kindergarten classes designated, and then I was like, oh, we need a 4th. So we're going through a process of trying to accommodate that with the spaces that we had at the time.
Can I add on to that? The other thing that I would say from a curriculum perspective or a program perspective is we highly encourage outdoor learning in kindergarten. And so we would love to see all of our kindergarten classes also using outdoor spaces to sort of help balance that out as well.
All right. And so I guess when looking at spaces, does that determine how many students are going to be in there and therefore how many teachers and ECE?
Jen, I don't.
The ministry does set classroom size standards. What's coming to my mind is 750 square feet for the secondary and 1,050 for kindergarten. So from a facilities perspective, from square footage perspective, and then the cap size perspective, I would say all of that has been taken into account. And so in our older buildings, our classrooms are much larger than any new schools that are being built right now, because the classroom standard size has actually become smaller. So because you're in a Mackenzie, your classrooms would be considered large.
I can't imagine. It was a room, essentially the size of these tables for 30 kids and 2 to 3 adults, that's not a lot of space. And my final question was about secondary school. And with enrollment and allocations, and maybe this is also a curriculum question, but how does staffing impact what classes teachers are teaching and what ones are going to be virtual?
So what happens are students make selections of what it is that they're interested in taking. We look at the school size in terms of their population, and based on that, they're allocated with a formula, a number of teaching staff that they will have available. And then they use that to start allocating staff to the sections that they have. So based on whatever students have basically chosen, and then they staff that. If there is something that could not be staffed with their existing staff, then during our staffing process, it would come through that it's a vacant section and somebody else would be in the system, in the district, would be assigned there if we had them. And if not, the final layer of that is then it would be a posting for a job to be filled.
And so the follow-up question, then I'm going to try to do it from our board meeting. When it comes to empowering and achieve, do we see any problems with staffing as a response to subject areas students might be interested in versus having students choose between the expertise of staff? For example, we have one science teacher who is regularly teaching art, and I'm sure he did well, but I wonder if that might be something to consider in terms of who's teaching our students, what's their area of expertise, and are they able to convey that versus having someone teach a subject they're not super comfortable in, or French, for example, when they're actually quite strong in history.
So just for your awareness, Jody, is that there are regulations and instructions on how you are able to staff a building. There are some courses that are considered more general studies, and there are others that are considered protected. And most courses are general studies, okay? Also, though, having said that, again, during that staffing process, we have to do a process called mutual consent, which is if you are asking a staff member to teach something outside of their subject area and qualifications, then they would have to agree that they were willing to do it. But as the principal, you have a responsibility to say that you believe they can teach it. So you might be drawing on maybe someone's a history teacher, but their background is actually they're also an artist in the community. And you've seen that, and they would have these skills to teach art. I'm just giving an example. I don't know the exact situation, but it's that mutual piece. Both parties must agree that they feel that the teacher feels they're able to do it, and the principal says, yes, they have the background and skills in order to do that.
I think one of the things I'd really be interested in hearing from is from some of the secondary school staff who are teaching in new positions, how they feel it's going, and maybe how the students are responding. I know we get a lot of presentations of things that are going well, but it might be interesting to hear some difficulties with the staffing model. I've, of course, heard some in my area. And so I'd really like to hear it from people who are dealing directly with the students and who are teaching, how that's going, and if there's room for improvement or a way we might be able to do something differently to really focus on the different expertise of each school rather than the opposite, which is more kind of centralized top-down approach.
I would say, Jody, that, there's a little more nuance to it. There's ministry guidelines, there's collective agreements. All of that has to be followed, which it is. So sometimes there are things that we might think, like it might seem like it's central top down and not at the school, but to be honest, that's all of those pieces that are in place because of that unionized environment, right? As part of it, also with all the regulations that the ministry has that we have to follow as well.
So, sorry, the final thing is, okay.
Yeah, I'll just add a point. I actually would say I agree with what Jacqueline has shared, and having been a secondary principal, we both have been secondary principals, by the way, that it often what you're talking about is a result of the course selection process being very student-centered. Because what we do, and also there are many compulsory credits. So we have to staff the compulsory credits. We don't have a choice in that. But then for the electives, we try to be as student-centered as possible with the staff that we have in the building. And I've tried to do the opposite, where I offer like geography, because I have someone who really wants to teach this geography course, but it's not what the students want. And then they suffer. So we have to find I'm giving the most extreme example, but we have to find a balance between offering exactly what all the staff want to teach and offering what the students want to learn. And we have to find a balance and create a timetable that's a balance between those two, because that's what happens through the course selection process and what's offered in the course calendar.
Okay, and so how do we evaluate whether that's working for the students and whether it's working from the student perspective and from the teacher perspective?
I love that question. So I think that's where, at the school level, finding ways to get student voice and staff voice into the process and into what's offered and what's run. For example, students could be surveyed and asked ahead of time, ahead of the course calendar being created, what courses would you like, what are your interests? So that way that's reflected in there, but then also getting, and this happens often, the department heads often will share the voice of staff in terms of what they want to offer. So it's trying to get that voice for both sides. And then the department heads often have a lot of input into what goes into a course calendar. So I don't know, that's been my experience.
And part of the struggle that we're having right now, Jody, again, is because we're small. So if you put too many options, right? So I know that different schools have used some strategies to introduce some new things to students to just say, hey, you know, maybe this hasn't run in a while, or it's a new course that, you know, maybe you haven't heard of. Can we have info nights or times during the school day where we're talking to different groups of kids and ages to say, what about some of these other courses? Are you interested? Because sometimes people don't know what they haven't been exposed to before. But again, if you have way too many choices, the course selection just becomes, wow, okay, we only have 10 kids for every one of these classes. What are we going to run? Right? And we need more than 10.
And I suppose that was my high school experience, was we got to choose between typing on a keyboard or going to tech class. And in some ways it was great because we always had good teachers, you know, and I became a good typist, whether I liked it or not. On the like one of maybe I'll just be direct. One of the comments that I'm hearing is that some people are going to the Catholic school because this is being, or not so much that it's being offered, but their class is too big, too small, not being taught by a teacher who seems to specialize in the topic, things like that. So I was just wondering how we can get feedback into that, because I know at least for Mackenzie, course selection is huge. We lose a lot of people to Bishop. And so that's kind of where I'm going with all of the secondary school, is how can we see what's working from the student perspective and also from the teachers who are then teaching it, if the students seem to be doing well, or if there's something we could change with the enrollment process. And maybe now in September is a good time to start thinking about it. So those are all the questions. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you. Susan?
Oh, my question is pretty simple compared to the great conversation. Thanks for that. Can you tell me the difference between redundant and surplus?
Right. So redundant means that the staff member is not staffed to their full entitlement. So maybe the previous year they had been working full-time and they only were able to get staffed 4 out of 6 classes instead of 6 out of 6. And surplus means they weren't able to be staffed at all.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that.
I just wanted to share that there's a really good news story in this report, and that's that our enrollment in elementary is up significantly.
Yes.
So at revised estimates, we are going to see an increase in revenue. So provided that these numbers hold, I was going to say, on October 31st, right? Yeah, and so if those numbers hold, because I think we were sort of very close with secondary in terms of
Yeah,
like our projected enrollment in the spring compared to where we'll be October 31st, you know, we're going to be in the ballpark, but we're significantly up right now in elementary. And if that holds for the next 3 weeks to October 31st, then we should see a nice increase in revenue, which means that we have a little bit of extra, you know, funds to use come revised estimates. You know, so for example, Executive Council has already made the decision to assign a couple of extra EAs, a few extra EAs, because we had some students come to our district that we didn't know about with needs that need to be supported. So we've made the decision that we're comfortable. We know we'll have enough money to pay for those EAs. So we've gone ahead and allocated that staff. Just giving that as an example. Yeah.
Yes, I'll quote you because it was a short phrase. Smaller schools, robust programming courses. I think I know what that means, but can you just confirm what I think it means?
Mike, I'm sorry, because I was kind of laughing whenever you said it, because I was like, oh boy, what did I say? So go ahead and say it back to me again.
Smaller schools, robust programming courses.
Oh,
So let's say smaller high school.
yes,
So I think I know what that means. Just
right.
confirm.
I'm just saying we changed our approach a little bit this year in looking at how we would staff the secondary schools, because we've asked all of the principals to consider that, you know, when I first started working in the district, like the principal of the high school, and they should, like their job is always and still is to advocate for their high school. But it's like, and also to advocate for the district. So it was thinking about a way to take care of a smaller school. So can a larger school go, okay, well, maybe I could maybe do with a few less sections so that maybe a Madawaska Valley or a Mackenzie High School or something might get a few, because otherwise they're going to struggle to even offer the compulsories, right? So we are just looking, when I'm saying robust, just meaning that we can offer pathway options
So that's really music to my ears. Because I've been hearing from parents for the last couple of years that that has been an issue.
Mm.
And like you said, sometimes people jump ship. It's not necessarily they want to, but of course, that's something else. So I'm really pleased to hear that. That's exactly what I thought it meant. I just wanted to confirm. Okay, secondly, I just wanted to thank you because getting these 8 sections done as soon as you did, especially under the circumstances you were living under, is quite remarkable. And lastly, I just want to make the comment, just because of my experience as a school sport counselor, I found that the New Horizons students, particularly the ones that were in New Horizons in grade 8, that came to the high school, the longer they were out of their elementary school, the more challenging it was. So I think that through SEAC and Jenny, I think that's all being looked at because it was at first when New Horizons came out with that, oh, this is great. We can plunk Johnny or Janie there. They'll get all kinds of supports and everything, but there's a hidden cost to that. And I've seen it with my own eyes. So
Sure.
students being out of that mainstream for X amount of months or even a year or so is costly in ways that I won't get into.
Oh, and I think too, Mike, like, and everybody, sorry, but that, you know, like lots of things in education, certain things existed and we had access to when we didn't have access to all sorts of other things. Just think about school mental health itself, right? So I think that, you know, Jenny and her team are pausing and really looking at it and saying, okay, what are the impacts and what differences do we see? And do the benefits of doing this outweigh maybe some other gives? Because it's back to that student well-being piece and sense of belonging, I think, which is going to be one of the biggest gains by not having it.
That's more my philosophy too. I just wanted to echo that. I think, you know, that being really looked at by Jenny and her team,
Mhm.
I think is really wise. That they're looking, I mean, like you said to me a couple of years ago, things change, things never stay the same. And this is an obvious potential change. Okay, thank you.
Jenny, it's time.
I was just going to add just really quickly that at the same time as we're doing that, it doesn't mean that we're abandoning our partnership with the Phoenix Center, which was
Right. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
program. So we are reevaluating what that partnership can look like. So that because they still are funded to help support our community and to support complex needs in our community. So we're working with them to redefine what that support looks like in a different context. So we're not losing it. We're changing how it looks in the homeschool.
You know what? I honestly thought about tearing off a strip and just passing it to Dave. But I will just bring it up again because I agree with Mike and with Jacqueline. I think it's a great idea to take, well, of course, to allow smaller schools to have a bit more robust program. And so again, I think how can we see if that worked? Like, is there a way we can come back at some point and say, this is what we did differently this year.
Right.
These are the outcomes, good or bad.
Yeah. So from my perspective with human resources and having been involved with secondary staffing for my entire career, really, but encouraging that collaboration will be me connecting back with the secondary principals to talk that through and see. But I also think the other piece around what you've suggested already and that Kristen has responded to is around the students and what they're feeling about that as well. And some of that has to do with our V-learning options and what people have access to and how that's working. And I just think the big piece is, we're lucky to have a really nice group of educators and leaders at secondary, including the guidance counselors who came together with us to try and problem solve and think, I care about the kids in my school, but I also care about the kids in other places. And what if we tried this? And what if we tried that? And I know like Krista Rakowski in her position has regular meetings with the guidance counselors and they will feed information back. And then through Cassidy's, we'll do the same thing. And we'll hear, how did that feel? And I'd say on one hand, like Arm Prior kind of felt the pinch. They were quite generous. and so maybe we've learned to be like, well, just scale that back a little bit. But also there could be other things that they're thinking of that I haven't noticed from where I'm sitting in terms of looking at just the data. So we'll continue the conversation, and it's been something that's been ongoing year over year to just kind of say, what can we do to be creative, to respond to some really small sites, really?
And so maybe at our next, or not our next, but in two or three meetings like this, we might be able to hear back
We'd like to hear back.
if we could.
And actually, that just sort of reminded me that one of our 8 focus goals is all around pathways.
Oh, nice.
So this conversation
Yeah.
will help us inform some of the concrete actions that
Like we can talk about.
Yeah. And that can fit into there.
Yeah.
And then at the mid-year and the final. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
Makes sense.
Anything else? I just have a couple of questions.
I didn't expect so much conversation. It's Jody saying. It's good. It's good. Keep going.
On the second page, so you have a couple of acronyms that couldn't figure out. So the ISAs and CDAs.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we used some acronyms and we didn't tell you what they were.
Yeah.
I
So
apologize.
for me, like the CDA, so that's my wife. I go, well, Canadian Diabetes Association. Okay, that's probably not what it was.
Probably not, probably not. So ESPs are the umbrella term for the EA group, really. The ISAs are intensive support. They do the work that we have with students identified with autism. And what inclusion, thank you, inclusion support, and they work with the staff and with students to, give support ideas around programming. So they're not staffed to a building, they're staffed throughout the district. The CDAs are the communication. Now I'm not going to be able to disorder. Assistant, like we don't use the full name very often, but they are, what they do, Leo, is we have SLPs, which are speech and language pathologists in our district, and they will assess who needs speech and language support, and then the CDAs work with the students in that closer ratio so that they can give them some additional support. So they can also help teachers think about strategies they can use in their classroom. And they'll also work one-on-one with students to work on some of the speech and language piece too. And then library assistants and supervisors.
Good.
Yeah.
The other
Good
question
questions, though.
I have is so it says the district has also secured temporary funding through Jordan's principle to support 24 eligible First Nation students. Can you expand on that? And like, do we have 24 helpers with the 24 students?
Yeah, so the funding is under the ESP staffing. So that means that applications have been made either through the school and in partnership with the community, or the community could also be making that application. And they would be indicating that they're looking for they would specifically say they're looking for some educational support personnel for this student. And so that's considered temporary funding because they give it to us like on a year basis, sometimes 2, it just depends. And then they'll reassess that. So it's specifically here under ESP staffing because that's what they've been allocated for.
EA support.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
Good.
Can I just ask, is that federal funding? That's federal, right? Okay, thanks.
Any more questions? No. Thanks for a good report.
Great.
All our questions.
Great. Thanks, Leo.
Last but not least, everybody's been waiting for this one to see how much, right? So the trustee honorary report. Yeah.
Thanks, Leo. Yes, I know everybody looks forward to this one every year. So continuing on that good news story of our enrollment increasing, we always look at the previous year because the formulation of this is the Education Act. And so if we look at the columns, the total is actually on the left. Normally it would be on the right, and it's on the left. And we have a column for the chair, the vice chair, the trustees, and the trustee indigenous. And we that was a newer position for our board that came into play almost 5 years ago now, I think. And we just wanted to illustrate that there's no difference between a trustee or a trustee indigenous. The allotment is the same, that 5,900. The based on the enrollment is the same, the $2,043.62 in this case is the same. And so when you look at the year over year, that increase of $20.18. Don't spend it all in one place. $20 is there. And then on the back side, of course, you can see all of those calculations that are outlined in the Education Act. And that's how we come to that total. Oh, and you're right, that it's paid from November 15th to November 14th. You may recall there was that shift in the school year, right? And so we're into this now going forward. I sure hope you don't have any questions.
You have a couple of questions. Any questions? Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Leo.
We could negotiate a new contract.
Okay.
Work that that right now.
Any other new business other than contract negotiations? No. Right, so I need a motion and a seconder to adjourn the meeting. Everybody wants to say, go ahead. Thanks, Jody. And Carthy, thank you for seconding. All in favor? That's it. Thanks, everybody.
Good.